Hello and welcome to the final game 14 of this 2024 World Chess Championship. And we have a winner. I won't give that away. Just follow the action here and let's see what happened. It looked like Ding Liren, the 32-year-old world chess champion from China, he starts out with knight to f3, the ready opening. And the young 18-year-old challenger from India, the youngest world chess champion challenger in history, he responds with d5, grabbing space in the center. And then we have g3 being played, the king's Indian attack. So interesting choice. The game is transposed from the ready opening into the king's Indian attack. And so the young challenger grabs even more space in the center. Of course, he can't push this pawn to e5 or the knight would capture. So the next best thing is to go ahead and push the c pawn, controlling valuable real estate in the center of the board. And so the game continues with bishop developing, lining up on this long diagonal and allowing the king to castle quickly to the king side. So the game continues with knight to c3, developing a piece, controlling squares in the center. And the game continues with d4 here, striking back in the center. And so, what will the young challenger do? Should he attack with this less valuable flank pawn, capturing the more valuable central pawn? Or will he just develop maybe this e pawn, unleashing the bishop to protect this c pawn? Let's find out. Yes, he does that. The bishop is now protecting this c5 pawn that's under attack. So the game continues with castling by the world champion, and we have a pawn exchange in the center. Knight recaptures. Will the knights exchange off the board now? No, not on this move. We have knight at g to e7, backing up the other knight. In case there is a capture, the knight can recapture. So the game continues with c4 being played. Well, now there's the option to attack possibly. If the queen captures, well, then the knight can develop and chase that queen away. So let's see what happens. In fact, the young challenger does proceed with this plan. The queen captures, knight develops with tempo here on the queen. The queen will have to retreat, and the queen retreats back to the original square. Interesting choice. Now there's a decision. Do you just capture here? But then that could lead to a queen exchange. And then, a possible attack here, unless the knight recaptures. So let's see how the game continues. A lot going on here. The young world champion challenger Gukesh, he decides to push forward. The best move according to the computer. This gains space. The bishop is attacking the knight now, but if that's captured, you can just recapture towards the center. And so the world champion decides instead to push forward, attacking this pawn, the best move according to the computer. And at this point, the analysis is that white is ahead, almost the equivalent of half a pawn, even though they're even in material at the moment. So we have a bishop lining up here. So a battle is being waged here on this d4 pawn. We have two attackers and three defenders here. But one of those could be knocked out if the bishop captures, but that would just give up the bishop pair and give up a valuable defensive bishop, that could cause weaknesses on the light squares around the king if it's traded away. So we have pawn attacking. Usually the best idea is to attack with the weakest piece. Of course, the queen couldn't capture. You don't want to give up the queen. So the attack continues, or excuse me, the trade of pieces continues here. Pawn is recaptured by the bishop. Knight blocks the path of this bishop, develops at the same time. The bishop was attacking this pawn, forcing this bishop to perform guard duty here on the back rank. So the game continues with castling by the young challenger. Now his king is safer. His rook is closer towards the center where it can do more in the upcoming fight. So the knight drives forward, attacking the bishop. And now we have a bishop retreat, the first mistake in the game. So what does the computer recommend here? Apparently the recommendation was instead to push this pawn to e5. That could give up your bishop pair after a capture here. And then possibly the knight could recapture. Then you would have a good knight on this outpost on d4. So the game continues. Let's go back here. Well, I could play this out a little bit if we go back to what the computer recommended. So here the recommendation would be knight to capture, taking the bishop pair. Instead of a queen or a knight capturing here on d4, the computer recommends the e-pawn capturing, gaining space. But you could be left, you have this isolated pawn for black, and as pieces exchange off the board, this pawn could become an endgame target. All right, back to the action in the game. We have the bishop retreating. The computer says that's a mistake. So now an inaccuracy is played, b3, and white is still ahead by 0.40, almost half a pawn equivalent here. The idea of this move is maybe to allow the bishop to attack the rook, or to just develop to b2 and aim up here at the king side. But the computer doesn't like that. Apparently, queen to e2 would have been a better move. So after this, the computer says that white jumps up to almost 3/4 of a pawn advantage here. And there's a threat that once you move this queen up here, the rook could position here on d1 and attack the queen. Now, instead of this line, we have, let's take a look here. After b3 in the game, we had a6 attacking this knight, driving the knight back. And then the bishop launches forward here, attacking the knight, pinning it to the rook. That common theme that we've seen throughout this World Championship match of a less valuable piece attacking, lining up on a more valuable piece, even though there are pieces in between. If those pieces have to move, there could be a discovered threat on the more valuable rook here by this less valuable bishop. So the game continues with bishop developing, breaking the pin of the knight to that rook. And now we have e5, the best move in the position, gaining some space in the center, kind of freeing up the light squared bishop here. And now the game continues with queen pressing forward. We have the bishop developing. Knight jumps onto this outpost. And now a pawn, a minority attack basically on the queen side. 2 pawns versus 3. What will happen here? So we have an exchange, an inaccuracy. And according to the computer, now black has a very slight edge after this exchange. The computer preferred rook at A to c1 here, because if these pawns exchange off, it will open up the c file with a discovered attack on the knight here. So here, once again, a piece is lining up on another piece with pieces in between. This time it's not a more valuable piece, but it is an unprotected one. And we have this threat of bishop lining up on the knight and the more valuable rook here. So in the game, we had an exchange, and after the pawn recaptures, we have the knight dropping back here, and interesting choice. The computer says this is the best move. The knight is placed on a square where it could be captured, but then this bishop will no longer be protected by the pawn, and also this knight move unleashes the bishop, this discovered attack on knight and rook here. So the game continues with a capture. The computer says that is excellent, but it would have been even better to capture on b2 here. So white now has a slight edge. The game continues with a capture of the knight, the best move in the position. And now the rook is under attack. What will black do here? So we do have the best move played. Bishop captures bishop. The rook is under attack, so the queen captures to get rid of that threat. And now the queen is aimed up here at the king side. But quite a few pieces have come off the board at this point. So the game continues with rook getting out of the line of fire and at the same time protecting this pawn. The game continues with a rook developing move lining up on the opponent's queen. So the queen gets out of the line of fire, and once again, the theme of lining up on the more valuable piece. The queen lines up on the king, pins this pawn. We have this possible attack here. White could even capture this pawn, but that would kind of wreck his pawn cover here and open up his king side. So the bishop drops back here. Doesn't return back to the g2 square, but here maybe the bishop is a little more active, and it prevents the bishop from moving to g4, targeting the rook here. And by going to f3 with this bishop, it does give the king the chance to push forward and protect that bishop and kind of get off the back rank. And in the end game, as pieces are flying off the board here, you want to have your king in a position to move into the action in the end game. As the pieces come off, the king can be very valuable for offense and defense. So pawns are exchanged here, knocking out a little bit of the cover around white's king. And now we have a 3 versus 2 pawn majority on the king side for black. And then an endgame advantage possibly for white here of 2 versus 1 pawn on the queen side. So the pawn pushes forward, best move in the position, because now it limits the ability of this pawn to push forward. If this pawn pushes forward to here, it can be captured. And then if the queen captures, this battery could go after this pawn. So this is a good move here by the young challenger. His single pawn is kind of fixing these 2 pawns, and preventing them from moving. All right. The world champion decides to push them anyway. So he presses forward to a4 here. Apparently, rook to d2 would have been a better move, preparing to possibly double rooks on the open d file. So here we have a capture en passant. The rook captures, helping guard this pawn here, but there are 3 pieces targeting. So let's see what happens here. We have pawn pushing forward to g6, giving an opening to the king, but of course, that cannot be used at the moment because the bishop is targeting this diagonal. And the computer says that the best move instead would have been rook at f to c8. So it would have been better to just, excuse me, place your rook on an open file instead of having it sitting here next to the king just defending a pawn. So the game continues with a queen centralizing, and now we have queen pushing forward. What does this move do? Well, let's find out. It's the best move according to the computer. It does cover central squares. Maybe it's trying to prevent a bishop trade here, but I don't know if that would be a great move, because then there's a possibility of maybe pinning that bishop to the queen here. So the game continues with pawn pushing forward. And now the queen captures. Queens come off the board. So now we're down to rooks and a bishop endgame. So white is behind by a pawn, so we'll have to see what happens here. The game continues with rook pressing forward, trying to get rid of a pair of rooks here as this rook is pinned to the king. So we have capture, bishop captures, and now pawn presses forward. And it looks like the young challenger is going to press his pawn majority forward and try and go into an endgame with that extra pawn and see if he can promote it. So here we have a bishop blocking black's bishop, threatening a possible trade. So the trade is avoided, the bishop is kept on the board, and now rook grabs the open c file, king steps forward, getting ready for the endgame action. And now we have the rook on the 7th rank, along with the bishop. And the only defender is the king. So, what will the young challenger do here? What is the best move? According to the computer, bishop to g6 has to be played. And of course he plays that, defending his pawn. So we have rook pressing forward, threatening a trade of the rooks. So the young challenger avoids the trade. And we've seen this theme in numerous games throughout this World Chess Championship, where the world champion has tried to exchange off material, and Gukesh just refuses to trade material, keeping his chances alive. Unless he is absolutely forced to trade that material or decides that it will benefit him to trade. All right, the king presses forward, trying to, press up the board and join the future endgame action. So rook develops over here to e1, and so maybe it's a future chance of trading off these bishops, or just trying to control this diagonal if this bishop moves. Also, maybe by going here, the I don't know, maybe the king is restricted on his movement. Let's see what the young challenger has in mind. So the world champion sidesteps his rook over. Now we do not have this, this move can't be played at the moment because of the rook. So the young challenger presses his pawn forward. Generally, in common chess strategy dictates that you press the unopposed pawn in your pawn majority. So this pawn could press forward, not now because the rook is covering this square, but in the future, this pawn could press forward, and if there's a capture, then you would have a recapture and a passed pawn. So the game continues with the rook just stepping to the side, maintaining guard duty along this 4th rank, and the rook moves up here to e5, targeting the bishop. The bishop retreats, and now this pawn is under attack, although it is defended by the bishop. So the game continues with the king stepping up the board, and now we have a king retreat. So maybe this is just a waiting move, trying to see what his opponent will do. Rook steps back. This guards any possible threats against the king if the rook moves here in the future to a6. And now we have rook stepping closer to the center here, and the game continues with g4 being played, chasing the bishop. The bishop targets the rook here. So rook counterattacks the bishop, and now we have a bishop retreat. Well, I guess not a retreat, pressing forward up the board for white. Okay, the king is slowly moving up the board, and it looks like the world champion is just stuck, kind of waiting to see what will happen. He tries to exchange off pawns, which is usually a good idea if you're behind in material. You want to trade off pawns, and as you do that, it will be less of a chance that your opponent will be able to promote a pawn, as more of them leave the board. So we have the best move being found. This pawn pushes forward, fortifying, and so now after capture, recapture towards the center, we have the 2 versus 1 majority here, and the game continues with rook guarding this 4th rank, guarding this square, protecting the bishop at the same time. So the game continues with bishop dropping back, or perhaps it will reposition maybe onto this diagonal. Let's see what happens. Although you'd have to be careful with that, because if this bishop moved here at the moment, you could have a possible pin of the rook here, or pin of the bishop to the rook. So the game continues with the king moving forward. We have an attack with check by the rook. King drops back and is now trapped on the back rank. So black uses this opportunity to reposition his king, trying to bring it around and get it into the action. So we have a check. The king steps forward, but remains behind the cover of this pawn. So now we have rook, controlling this 4th rank, discouraging this pawn from pushing forward, and bishop moves up here, defending this backwards pawn, the weak point in the chain, the base of the chain, the pawn chain there. All right, rook sidesteps. So we have a lot of maneuvering going on here. And now the king once again gets ready to try and reposition itself up towards the center. So rook finds the best move in the position. At this point, black has a slight edge here, but the game is pretty even. So we have the king stepping around, getting closer to the action here, moving up the board, and a mistake. This is the game, a game-losing mistake here. Rook to f2, and with this mistake, the game jumps to the equivalent of 5 pawns worth of material advantage here. So this looks like the deciding move of the game. And once again, this has been a common theme. Look at the clocks here. Less than 10 minutes on the clock for Ding Liren, the world champion, and still over an hour for the young challenger here. So that has been a factor in this world championship. So what should the world champion have done here? It looks like bishop to g2 would have been a better move. This would have kept the game about even, just a slight edge for black. And then here it looks like rook to b5 or b3 is recommended by the computer. All right, back to this mistake. Why is this a mistake? Well, the best move here is played by the young challenger. Exchange off the rooks, the king moves up, and the game continues with, well, according to the computer, there's a mate in 67. But let's see what happens in the actual game. We have bishop to d5, the best move being played by the young challenger. And is that the only move? Yes, that is the only move that wins the game. It looks like if the second and third best moves just lead to a draw pretty much. So the bishops must be exchanged here after capture. The king moves up, but the final move here is king to e5, and here the world champion resigned because it looks like the young challenger has the opposition. So I'll play this out a little bit and show you what could have happened. But this is where the game ended. And we have a new 18-year-old world chess champion, the youngest in history. I'll go over how the game could have continued, especially for the beginners out there that aren't sure. And then I'll look at the game accuracy rating and see what the computer gives each opponent as far as their accuracy. But it looks like it came down to that one rook move, which was the game losing move. All right, so here the computer recommends king to d3 as being the best move, but then that allows f4 to be played. So then there's the threat of just capturing here, or pushing forward maybe. Let's see what the computer recommends. So now they recommend king to e2, but then after f3, you have a protected passed pawn. The king is being checked. And now king to e3 grabs the opposition for white. And for the beginners, opposition is when there's an odd number of squares in between the kings, and it forces one of the kings to give way, either moving to the side or moving back. So here, the best move would be, well, there are options. You would think that maybe this move would be played, but now you have king to d3, f2 could be played. The king would go here after the pawn, but then after black grabs the opposition, we have king captures, and now what? It looks like king to d3 is the quickest way to win. So computer recommends king to g1, king to f1. So what is going to happen here is as this king retreats, the other king moves in, and then after king to g2 grabbing the opposition, we have king to e3. And it's just not looking good. This pawn is going to fall here. So the computer, I'll play the number one recommended move. So after this happens, you have king defending, but now once the king goes here, it forces the king into the corner. This pawn falls, and then after the opposition is gained, it's too late because the king is in front of the pawn. So the king can step to the side, and then the computer recommends this as being the best move, but then you have something like this, or the pawn can push forward. Oh, excuse me, that was the wrong move. Let me go back here. Well, yeah, it says they can play king to h2, but they prefer this move. Um, if the king tries to go here, then that pawn pushes forward and it squeezes the king out from the promotion square anyway. So the computer recommends this, but now you have king to h2 and the pawn will be escorted up to promotion. All right, I hope that helped the beginners to understand why the world champion resigned back there. So now let's look at the accuracy level here. The world champion played at 95.1% accuracy, which is outstanding. But the young challenger played at 98.1% accuracy. So, phenomenal play. I think he had one mistake in the game, but it wasn't enough to, be a game losing mistake. Whereas, the world champion had a game losing mistake. All right, so the best moves, we had 29 of the best moves by the new world champion now. And so only 23 best moves by the former world champion. And now 4 great moves played by Gukesh, and Ding had no great moves or brilliant moves. The bad moves. The Ding had 2 inaccuracies versus 1 by his opponent. They each had 1 mistake. And now if I move my image here, well, you can see it right above my image. It looks like the world champion or former world champion Ding Liren played 2,900. He played at a 2,900 level, which is outstanding. But the new world champion, Gukesh, he played at a phenomenal 3,000 rating level. So the world champion, Ding Liren, the former world champion, played 99.8% accuracy in the opening, and his opponent played 97.5% in the opening. But in the middle game, we have Ding with 96.9% accuracy, and Gukesh had 98.3% accuracy in the middle game. And the end game, this is what decided it. 92% accuracy for Ding Liren and 98.1% by the new world chess champion, 18-year-old Gukesh Damaraju. So we can look forward to many more great things by this new and young world chess champion, the youngest ever, 18 years old from India. Congratulations to this world chess champion. All right, well, as always, feel free to leave any comments, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.